think we're going to call the meeting to order. It is Tuesday, November 19th, 6:03. With that, I'd like everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we have the roll call, please?
Committee Member Brock? Committee Member Brock?
Here.
Committee Member Davis?
Here.
Committee Member Carr?
Here.
Vice Chair Bush?
Here.
And Chair Burwell.
Here.
I will now ask if any committee members will be recusing themselves tonight on any matters pursuant to the Levine Act. Hearing none, we will now move on to public input. Public input is permitted only on items not on the agenda that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the body. State law prohibits the body from taking any action on items not listed on the agenda, including issues raised under this agenda item. We have one member of the public wishing to speak under this item, John Allen.
Hi, John Alley. These meetings started when the LA County Civil Grand Jury judged Santa Monica one of the most financially mismanaged cities in LA County. Today it's worse. The original auditing firm, Moss Adams, should be replaced. They're still conducting virtual audits, waiting 9 months to a year for answers from city staff and city-funded nonprofits. We need a different firm with no long-term ties to the city, council, or staff. Staff should not be interviewing the candidates. This committee should. City Manager David White and staff should not review, then edit reports and audits prior to this committee. There is no transparency. If Santa Monica must be run by people who care and know what they're doing, financially and ethically. Why did you delay overview of the Moss Adams homeless study until after council elections? It's been ready. Why do 1.4 million of city grants to people concerned still remain unaccounted for? Why does 809,000 of city grant money to the people concerned not reconcile between their fiscal report and their general ledger? Why does the city give away our tax dollars to St. Joseph's and Clare Matrix, who after 2 years do not document over half their expenditures? The city's unfunded pension liability is growing at a faster rate than the city's general fund. In 2019, it was 45% of the city budget. Today, it's over 150%. We're looking forward to working with new incoming council members on this committee who will hold accountable, and we hope pay attention and are not worse than mayors and committee members Sue Himmerich, Gleam Davis, and Phil Brock have been these past few years. Today, the city is broken, financially and in more other ways than ever before. Thanks.
And that concludes general public input for this evening. We'll now move on to item 2, public input under special agenda items, closed session. Well, there is no closed session. Consent calendar only, and we have no members of the public wishing to speak on this item.
On the consent item, there is the approval of the minutes, which is the only item on the consent calendar for the August 20th, 2024 meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
I move.
I'll second. Can we get a voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
I'm abstaining.
So we have one abstention and 4 ayes. So that passes.
Okay, we'll now move on to public input on remaining agenda items, and we have one speaker for this item, Denise Barton. And Ms. Barton, just a reminder for the record, just please state which item you're speaking on.
Good evening. For item 3C,
The CAP assessment. One of the first things I see is the excuse that the city is not recovered from the pandemic. Nowhere in the report is any mention of the 2023 power lawsuit settlement of $229.8 million, or that more lawsuits are pending due to the abuse of children in this case. Was there an intentional reason for that? I also wonder why staff is being complimented for the job they're doing when there is no tracking, reporting, or inclusion of the public in the process by staff. Along with the city's using outdated protocol from the 1980s and unrealistic funding for projects. Although it would appear as though the PAL lawsuit debt is not going to be paid off anytime soon, by the October 24, 2023 City Council Agenda Item 11A Fiscal Year 2022-23 Year and Budget Review, Attachment E Financial Policy Revisions, which could also account for the efficient SharePoint platform to the inefficient Excel program due in part to lack of resources. So the city manager is putting staff at a disadvantage, or would this be his way of hiding the CIP projects are being approved by the council, but very few are being completed due to lack of funding? And that the last status update was done in 2028, as well as the city and the city council's prioritization of projects of the residents and city council above the health and safety prioritization, of which the city's category is very vague and open to misinterpretation and is classified as dire, as well as having auditors seen the city's repayment plan for the restricted funds used to pay off the city's $22 million. Thank you.
And that concludes public input for this evening. Now we move on to item 5A, fiscal year 2023-2024 audit update.
Can we get the staff presentation for this agenda item, please?
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Ryan Domino. I'm the audit partner with Lance Sull and Lunghard, the city's external independent auditors. We are conducting the 2024 fiscal year financial statement audit. And actually, we're about wrapped up with this. So this week is our final week of field work, and we had a preliminary results meeting with Director Santiago and the finance team earlier today, actually. So have a little bit more work to do, but by and large, we are in the review and wrap-up phases at this point. One thing I'd just like to remind this subcommittee of what our audit is and what it is not. Just very briefly, it is a financial statement audit, so we are looking at the numbers that are reported in the city's financial statements, verifying that they are in fact supported by sufficient appropriate evidence to make us comfortable that those numbers and those transactions do exist and they did occur, and that the users of the financial statements can look at the numbers and come to informed decisions. So like I mentioned, we're not 100% done yet. We are expecting to conclude our audit this Thursday and have all the open items addressed and testing completed and all documented. The results of our preliminary work thus far is we don't have any reportable findings at this time. Like I said, subject to change pending conclusion of the audit this week, but thus far it's been a good, clean audit. The next steps that we're looking forward to after completion of the audit testing is the actual draft of the financial statements to be provided, at which point we will review those draft financial statements, provide feedback to the city, make sure that they are compliant with GAAP and all the latest pronouncements required by the Government Finance Officers Association and the Government Accounting Standards Board. And then after that's completed and we're comfortable with how the numbers look and it matches all the information that we've audited, we'll issue our auditor's report, and at that point I will probably come back to the next meeting after that and give the full presentation with an in-depth look at the work we did and our findings and those type of things. So that is my presentation. It's very short, not much to go over tonight, but I'm happy to take any questions you might have on it.
Do any committee members have questions? I have a few questions. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So this was a substantive audit. In other words, you audited, you pulled enough transactions and audited a specific percentage of each of the balances in the accounts.
Yes, so we identify accounts that are deemed material to the financial statements through professional standards guidelines, and then we develop enough audit evidence, whether it's through pulling samples, whether it is through analytical procedures, looking at trends, that type of thing, to give us comfort over those numbers.
And you did not test any internal controls in this audit, is that correct?
No, we look at internal controls, but we don't test it to the same level that you would in a SEC public sector audit. So we do pull some samples. We make sure that if the city says that the controls over this particular procedure are X, that there is sufficient documentation backing it up to say that yes, X is actually happening.
But you're not relying on the internal controls
No.
for your audit opinion?
We are not.
Okay. So any questions I have?
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next item in this agenda item 5 is the internal audit work plan status report from Moss Adams.
Great. Good evening, Audit Subcommittee. Colleen Rosillas from Moss Adams. I have a short and sweet status update for you all. So we have 2 projects this fiscal year. The capital program best practices assessment is complete. You'll be hearing about that shortly, so I will not spoil that for you. We also had a cash handling internal controls review planned. That project we actually got started ahead of schedule, so we just got started last month. We've conducted our initial interviews, and we'll be conducting more interviews and developing our testing plan and conducting our analysis in the coming months. And that's all we have going on right now. Any questions?
Any questions? No questions from the audit subcommittee, thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right. Moving along, we're going to have the next item, which is the Capital Improvement Program Study Report. Again, this is being presented by Moss Adams.
Good evening, everyone. I was told that it would pop. Yep, there you go. Let's test this. All right, great. Okay, good afternoon. Good to see everyone in sunny California. A little better weather here than Pacific Northwest. My name is Steve Bicchetti. I lead our construction and real estate advisory team. We were engaged by the city to conduct a capital program best practice and effectiveness assessment, a part of the internal audit program. The goal of this project was to assess the current state of the capital program, identify opportunities for effectiveness within the capital planning and management activities. So this included long-term capital planning, capital budget and financial management, capital project execution, and deferred maintenance. So we have a couple of good findings that we are looking forward to share with you. So we conducted the assessment between August and October 2024. We interviewed many of the parties here within city leadership to kind of get a good lay of the land. We reviewed CIP plans, policy, tracking, reporting, other relevant documentation around the capital program. We evaluated your process procedures against other peer cities from a kind of best practice standpoint. We selected cities that had high ratings within the GFOA, which is a best practice tool used within the space for best practice criteria and recommendations. And we leveraged 3 projects within our sampling selection to kind of validate kind of our understanding of the process. So before we get into this, we just want to commend the staff. As always, they were very great to work with. We do understand you guys have a job on top of audits. You guys don't like living in audit land like we do. We like living in it 10 hours a day, and you guys do not. You guys have full-time jobs, so we really appreciate all the time and effort you guys put in this project. Every time we needed any documentation or needed to jump on a call to validate or get an interview, you guys were more than happy to jump on the call. So we just really appreciate the team with the frankness, the transparency, the collaboration on these projects. That we find you guys very, very good to work with, and we really appreciate the partnership. Other aspects, whenever we give feedback, we find that they are very receptive to it. We do quite a few of these engagements across a lot of organizations. Sometimes people, they're very stuck with kind of legacy process procedures. Here we find there's a very receptiveness to what are the parties doing, how do we get better with kind of the resources we have available. We find that the staff are very engaged. So when we talk about capital planning, they're very interested in kind of what are best practices, how can we improve, and kind of troubleshooting kind of any of the recommendations that we have. And then we also noted that the CIP has a lot of elements that were deemed in alignment with GFOA's best practices. All right, so before we get in, just kind of the priorities. We have high priority, medium priority, low priority. We review the report results with management and kind of make sure that the observation recommendations were appropriate and kind of were in alignment with the priority ratings. So the high priority ratings were the project tracking reporting, project application prioritization, change order reporting. Medium priorities were project execution, policy procedures, and low priority are CIP book and best practices. What you'll see throughout this report, a lot of the observations and recommendations are tied to kind of resource constraints. So I just wanted to we have a section in the report that kind of notes the reduction in staff levels and kind of some of these stemming from that kind of root cause. However, I do think some of these with kind of systems or kind of updated policy procedures, you can optimize that to kind of enhance the process to be better aligned with best practices. All right. So the first one, project tracking and reporting. So the city doesn't have a system to automate the reporting of their capital plan. So when we go to some organizations, they have certain software systems or certain platforms that they are able to track and regularly report on their CIP against budget versus actual. Without that system, it's a very manual process. So that adds to a lot of resource constraints. It could add to potential errors or omissions within the reporting. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a super expensive implementation. There are software platforms that are cost efficient, but we find that if you have that control structure of gathering the data, tracking the data, and making sure the KPIs are in alignment with best practices, then you're able to report on projects from a holistic standpoint efficiently and effectively. Next, project application and prioritization. We have this also as a high-risk area where the criteria to determine what projects get funded and which ones do not are a little bit vague. So that could be improved through some transparency measures of potentially weighting scales. And the current process causes a lot of resource constraints because every project that you guys want to put on the plan has to get estimated. Some of those projects don't necessarily have a high likelihood of getting selected, but you're still going through all the motions. So we have some recommendations in our report of what some other cities are doing, for example, like City of San Diego or City of Pasadena, where they are ranking projects that have a high likelihood, and then you can focus the attention of resources of staff on those specific ones to free them up. So in the recommendations, we have consider opportunities to amend the project application process. So public works projects are only completing cost estimates for projects that are likely to be or have some likelihood of being completed. In the city of Pasadena, we had a good recommendation that shifting some of the responsibility to the departments in terms of having them prioritize what is a high need, a medium need, a low need. If it's a high need, get the involvement of public works. Maybe if it's a low need, kind of a wish list, maybe you don't need to spend as much time there as if you're resource constrained. C, adopt a prioritization criteria that appropriately weights critical maintenance needs and supports clear communication. So this kind of lines up with number 4 or D, that if you have a list of what are the priorities and it's very transparent on what is next in line, if alternative funding gets in, then you have a system that's well understood, that's transparent on what scopes are chosen and why. So deploying kind of a weighted system or framework so that it's well understood of how projects get prioritized, potentially having a review committee. I think you guys have one now, but maybe kind of reviewing that process is making sure that it's very formalized, that when you guys do make project selections, it's very transparent, well understood, or as much as it can be. Next, change order reporting. So change order processes can be improved with some of the reporting protocols. We found it difficult to really understand the change to specific projects, absent kind of holistic look at the project reporting. So generally in the report, we have some recommendations that whenever you have change order reporting, you should have it at a program level. And then if you guys are doing budget amendments, it's well understood what the original budget was, what the change amount is, what's the justification for the change, is it a design error, is it owner initiated, etc. Is there a schedule delay? So more information on what's driving the change. We find change orders are a very high risk area. Generally, if you have that visibility to what's causing the change order, you can either say, hey, are we not negotiating well, or are there other factors that are incorrect with the process that could have that can be mitigated in the future. So like if you're seeing a lot of design errors, for example, on change orders, and that's driving schedule or cost, then let's talk with the architect to see what the kind of the outputs or the deliverables within that contract are to improve the process. So we love change orders and data around change orders. Moving on to medium priority observations, policy procedures. So we love policy procedures. Some of the policies are quite out of date. Project execution. So here's what I noted before, that it was consistent theme within our interviews that resources were constrained. So with policies, we find that if you have a updated environment and you kind of review kind of the recommendations we're doing here, you can ensure that there's no inefficient processes that are being executed. So reviewing the capital program policies, we have some recommendations on which ones kind of higher priority than others, but making sure those are up to date, fit the current environment. Those can also be used for a training tool. Potentially you can see discrepancies on different parties doing different things to optimize the process. And then low priority, the CIP book, we compared that against GFOA. We noted a lot of things were in alignment with the GFOA best practices. We did have some enhancements in terms of having project description, having the holistic look at the project, and just a little bit more data on the project that would be helpful, just so that end users had a good understanding of what the project scope is, what's the total impact of it, and kind of those types of components. But overall, it was looking pretty good. Questions?
Yes, Jeff.
Okay. First question, is my mic on? I'm assuming it is.
Yes, easy.
Okay, great. Just a general question is, and I'm not sure if this is a management audit or financial audit question, but is there any discretion in terms of whether an expenditure goes down as a maintenance expense as opposed to a capital improvement?
Great question. Do you have that definition? Maintenance versus...
There you
Good evening, Rich Walter, Director of Public Works. Typically, CIPs are any projects that are over, is it $50 or $50,000? Anything below that is considered a maintenance effort. Now, however, having said that, we do have a capital improvement project budget, which we call the Facilities Renewal CIP, which is $2 million a year, and then that gets used for maintenance projects. But it's essentially a lump sum that we use for maintenance needs throughout the city.
Just a clarification question on that. Is there any difference or impact by classifying an expenditure one way or the other? I'm assuming it doesn't have a cash flow impact, but is there any other reason to categorize an expenditure either as a capital improvement or an O&M expense?
So each of the divisions within the Public Works Department has an operating budget, and the operating budget will oftentimes cover the regular annual maintenance needs. Now, if it's a larger project, let's say it's an HVAC system that needs to be replaced, that's not something that we can cover in our operating budget, and that's typically submitted as a CIP project, or it's covered under that facilities renewal capital improvement project.
Shifting topics slightly, what is the role of the finance group versus public works? I mean, in other words, how does the finance group get involved either in the prioritization or the categorization of these expenses?
Well, finance basically tells us how much general fund money is available, but Public Works manages the capital improvement program budget process. And then Finance, City Manager's Office, and Public Works currently composes the CIP committee.
So finance lets you know how much money is available, and then Public Works determines how or which projects are going to be prioritized.
The CIP committee determines that, prioritizes the projects.
And I'm sorry, what was the third group? You said Finance, Public Works,
And the City Manager's Office.
Finance also reviews the capital projects for any ongoing costs, because we have to account for those in the operating budget. So when a project's gonna kick off or be completed, we make sure that the operating costs are already in our forecast to be budgeted in a future year.
And same question with respect to change orders, or is your group involved in that as well? Or is it the committee?
When a project's approved by city council, there's a contingency within that, and those are under the authority of the public works director to approve change orders within the authorized amount.
Okay, I had a couple of other questions. In the report, and I realize these were just presentation slides, but actually in the Moss Adams report, the phrase modern technology solutions was identified. Is that a software package, or what is that would be installed to track the CIP?
Yeah, sure. We would define that as anything more than Excel. So it could be like Procore is probably the most common we see with major capital programs that has schedule, financial data that is a little bit pricier. We do see other packages, potentially Adaptive Insight, could be Smartsheet with kind of good controls around it. So it's if there's a lot of Excel spreadsheets that are managing the process, then we would consider that an area where you could potentially improve it. And if it's a lot of manual consolidations, if you had it centralized on a smart sheet or one sheet, then you could have multiple users in one spreadsheet managing the data.
Okay, you partially answered my next question, which is what is the difference between that next step at Excel, and is it just not having to manually replicate these spreadsheets, or
Right.
what is it do for you?
So I think, for example, like Adaptive Insight, which is kind of like a less expensive option than Procore, you can get the budget all established within that system, and then you can track actuals. So you could actually have it linked to the system of record, your accounting financial system, potentially your purchase commitment reporting, and you get the link of the data so that when you establish your CIP budget, and you could have multiple users in it, consolidating it, all rolling up to one number, that you could actually get performance reporting against that budget very easily. Right now, if it's in the current state, it's a very manual effort and a lot of resources. So we find that if you have a good tool, and I just speed up a few, there could be a lot of other options that could serve the need, but if you have it consolidated in a smart technology, you can reduce manpower and get potentially real-time data, or real-time after you close the books, it updates within like a couple hours. So having the real-time data is, in my opinion, worth every penny, because if you're seeing change orders real-time, potentially, then you can say, hey, what's going on with that project, versus seeing that data 6 months out from now and it's already done. So with the capital programs, even though you guys have reduced in spend, it's still a significant program. Getting that real-time data or timely data so that you can identify those types of issues is is well worth the money, in my opinion.
And does that address the transparency issue? And I noticed that came up with a couple
Yeah,
of the
exactly.
suggestions.
Yep. I think if you have the CIP and it's the transparency around prioritization and then around holistic reporting of the capital program, if you get those reoccurring reports, you can kind of see the project health status pretty easily. That are we on budget? Are we on schedule? Are there change orders? Are they non-significant, et cetera? So we find the transparency around the prioritization and the project health status checks, monthly, quarterly, kind of whatever you guys determine would be a good improvement.
Okay, and you anticipated, I think, answered my next question, which is what is transparency? And transparency is, I guess, the ability to more easily see where these projects are cost-wise.
Good data, meaningful data.
Okay. As we talk about the prioritization criteria being too broad, that was a statement that appeared in your report. I'm just curious, can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think just why certain projects move forward was unclear. So like if you go to another city, I think like city of Pasadena, for example, you can filter, or as Oakland, they have if you look at their unfunded projects, they prioritize it based off, if we get more money, this is the next project in line. So that level of being able to filter the scopes, we find is best practice of like, okay, here's our metrics for weighting projects, here's whatever the evaluation criteria, you get the inputs from the departments, you go to the committee, they kind of do their decision, and having the understanding of why scopes got picked and kind of the justification or the weighting scale. And then even for the projects that didn't get funded, where they at next in line, that process we find that people, if they have an understanding of what scopes got picked and there's some sort of like objective versus subjective reasoning as much as possible in kind of that objective seeing analysis for the unfunded, then they understand. They might not agree with the decisions, but if you define the framework and you do the math and you filter it, there's an understanding of why you reached the conclusion.
And would that be the committee that you mentioned earlier that would do that, or would that be Public Works that would be doing that prioritization?
So I think it'd be a mix. So I think you'd have your framework of what the scoring metrics are based off kind of those categories. And then I think the committee may be able to kind of say, hey, we really need this versus that with those justifications. But I think if you have the framework with the weighting and then kind of any deviations from that weighting and the justification of why, I think would help promote transparency.
Okay. And then also there was comments in the report, not on these slides, but within the report about some of these decisions not necessarily aligned with city priorities. Is that a specific document that you're pointing back to? What is, when we say city priorities, what are we talking about specifically?
Yeah, I think that came up just because some of the deferred maintenance, for example, like they need to get to, but it was not, I don't have a specific example, but it was just from the interviews, they were saying we did this project versus tackling the deferred maintenance on this specific project. So I think it's, without the weighted scale of why scopes get picked, I think there's a disconnect on what people understanding of, hey, we thought this was the right priority to do, but we did this instead. So I think absent kind of that objective way of reaching the conclusion, and if there's deviations with that justification from that committee, then I think there's a level of vagueness or people not really understanding why certain jobs got picked over other ones.
So are we saying then that committee would be the ones that would establish the priorities, which in turn would be used to prioritize the projects? I'm just trying to understand how to.
I think they can help with the framework on what's high, medium, low, risk, and then kind of based off kind of the sections you guys established, which is health, compliance, city, like kind of city preferences or fiscal accountability, I think, or the three you guys have. I think have the scoring metrics so that when people are submitting it, it's understood where they kind of land. Even if it's not funded, having the understanding of where they're up in the queue and why. So I think it's just having that discussion around what scopes need to get done from like a needs assessment or kind of the input from the departments, rating them in an objective way, and then kind of going through the committee to ensure that the framework's being deployed. and things potentially may need adjustment, but I think justification around what those decisions are and why, with kind of the healthy discussion around it, I think would kind of help with that transparency.
Mark, I just want to make a quick comment. I have a few other questions on other things. I'm not fully understanding sort of where the priorities are with respect to how we prioritize these projects. So maybe that'll be clearer as the discussion goes on.
Okay.
People ask questions. Okay, all right, let me quickly run through a couple of other things. That was the meat of most of what I had. But with respect to this reallocation, again, does finance have a role in this? Are they tracking, as we get into tracking and looking at what's on the list in the order of the projects on the list, is that strictly Public Works, or who's actually rank ordering the items on the unfunded list?
Yeah. Oscar, do you want to answer?
Yeah, so we identify the projects that are either a risk to the city or some kind of maintenance that we need to get completed. We look at how much funding is available, and then as a committee, we look at how we're gonna prioritize those, which ones go to the unfunded list for future funding. At a point where we find funding, then we would pull from those projects that are funded, those as a priority list that we would go back to, and identify what we need to fund next, again, based on risk or council priorities as well.
Okay. And then with respect to cost estimates, there was a lot of discussion in the report about cost estimates. And I think what I read was estimating the cost of these projects was a real drain on resources. And so they were looking at a couple of different ways of sort of bringing people up and doing cost estimates only on those projects that are moving forward. I mean, is that okay? If you're only estimating the cost of the projects that are moving forward, how do you determine which projects are moving forward?
Good question. So we provide an example in there of the city of Pasadena, where the departments fill out the requests. They put a prelim budget for it, and they rate it high, medium, low. So I think I'm kind of brainstorming with you because I don't have the exact answer. But if something's low priority, if your whole process currently is you go through the Public Works space
Okay.
and they're doing the estimate, it's probably not going to happen. I mean, you probably want some placeholder, but maybe you increase precision if it's a high risk.
Okay.
So I think there's a couple different options you could do. But I think the comprehensive estimating for something that's likely not going to get done, you don't need the precision there. You still need a good number to plug it to say, hey, how do we evaluate what we're going to do if we don't know what kind of a placeholder is? But I think kind of right-sizing the efforts within the estimate. So if it's something that's higher level precision. If it's low, then I think kind of figuring out what your tolerance for an estimate to be, because there's a cost to making it super precise.
Okay. And then what would be the role of third-party vendors? You mentioned a couple places in the report that third-party vendors would have a role.
So with resource constraints, third-party vendors are always an option. You can get parties on the bench to do kind of as-needed services. You can get estimating. You can get project controls. You can get project management. So I think when we hear a lot of topics around resource constraints, you can add kind of that variable flex option if you need it for kind of those specific areas of focus, so that you're not compromising kind of the safety of whatever the control is.
Okay. And then you guys use the term holistic life cycle. I was just curious, what is that? I know what life cycle means. What is a holistic life cycle?
So it ties back to reporting. So when we both assess reporting and we can do reporting. When we evaluate a project, we look at it from planning all the way to closeout. So you want to understand what the original budget was, whatever was in the CIP. You want to know as it progresses, like kind of what stage it's in and how that's increased from the original budget. Then you also want to see kind of usage of change orders, for example, so that you can look at the project and say, instead of a year by year saying we're on budget for these 2-year period, are you on budget from inception to date? Like, so you want to look at the project from a inception date standpoint so that you can evaluate it appropriately. It's hard to effectively evaluate a project's health status by 2-year increments.
My last question is, just stepping back from the report for a minute, what would have a bigger impact, a bigger positive impact, that is, hiring more people and alleviating that constraint, or implementing a better project tracking system?
I don't have that answer, but I would love to hear the discussion and the outcome of that. I think it's probably a combination of both, I'm assuming, but I think that'd be a good healthy debate to say, okay, what system would free up resources? What's the cost for that system? And does it offset after however much time? So I think kind of understanding getting a better understanding of the time commitment across all departments. And I think that's kind of an exercise you could probably figure out of what's the total time. And then if you got kind of the system understanding what the cost of the system would be and how that would actually create efficiencies, I think you can kind of figure out the cost benefit of that selection.
And time-wise, I'm assuming the system could be implemented faster than hiring the people? No.
Not my area of expertise, but I do work enough with implementation teams. It depends on the system, and I think I'd probably estimate 3 to 6 months to kind of get the planning framework going, and then implementing to do it appropriately.
I just would respectfully say you have to consider that the totality of the workload of many different aspects of this organization, and I think the one area that we're not really touching on, I really appreciate this audit because I think it's touching on the right recommendations, but what we're not really addressing, and I think when you look at our CIP, is to profoundly understand how underfunded our CIP is, and when you really look at the list of CIP projects, we're not really making a lot of decisions because there isn't really a lot of money to work with to make a lot of decisions. We're funding a lot of very basic items at this point in time, and so in terms of how long it would take to do staffing versus systems, that's a complicated answer because our technology team is sorely underfunded and severely understaffed. So it could end up taking longer to get something done than a 3 to 6 month time frame.
Totally. Yep. Good point.
I'll make a comment then I'll move on to the chair. And that, I think David's comment is exactly where I was going with this. Where if we tried to take a step with limited resources, what should we do? I mean, I wish we had everything. I wish we had unlimited amounts of capital, and unlimited people to implement systems and unlimited project managers, but we don't. So we just, and given that in this committee, we can't affect the amount of money that's available, what is it that we could do that would have the biggest bang in the shortest period of time, or the most positive impact in the shortest period of time? And I'll hand it back to the chair.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Yes, Subcommittee Member Davis.
Yeah, thank you for the report. You use the word prioritization a lot. And as I look at the list of projects on our CIP, I see that a lot of these are projects that council directed staff to undertake, some of them literally 10 years ago. Like improvements out at the airport park. And that was when the closing of the airport was 20 years down the road. Now we have an airport to park planning process. So the question is, would we even want to spend money putting in certain amenities at the airport when they might well come out literally 5-10 years down the road? So I guess one of the questions I have is in terms of prioritization. I mean, some of these like regular maintenance and facilities and upgrades and HVAC systems and stuff, staff can deal with that. But I'm wondering, does it make sense at some point to come back to council and say, okay, here are all these sort of bigger things. I'm looking at Reed Park Dog Park, which I honestly think was suggested as a way to address some of the issues we were having with disorder in Reed Park. We've come up with some other ideas, or the Reed Park Community Garden, or the new athletic sports fields at the airport. Does it make sense to try and take some of these off the list by coming back to council and saying, 10 years ago, council wanted to do this, but, and maybe this is for the city manager, I don't know, but 10 years has come and gone, we haven't done this, do you still want us to leave this on the list?
I think that would be a very helpful exercise, because I think when you know, outside of some of the bigger items which tie specifically to council priorities, when you look at our CIP list, Rick will correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're trying to fix what's gonna break first at this point in time, more than anything else. So outside of like the airport conversion project, or Memorial Park, rehabilitation and renovation, right, we're taking those cues from the city council. But the rest of it is really just, we know it's gonna break tomorrow, so we gotta get to it, and they can correct me if they think I'm wrong.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess the comment I would make is, if we have an issue with understaffing and underfunding, does it make sense to go through an exercise to take some of these things off the table, so that we're not constantly worried about, do we need to do estimates and stuff, and maybe it makes it a little more manageable, even if it's just from an appearance standpoint, instead of having a list of, these are 100 things we need to do, if you can get that down to 50, by bringing some of this back to council and saying, you know, do you still want to do this, in light of the fact that the situation on the ground's changed since you originally gave us direction to do that. So I think that would be my comment, is maybe a way to get some efficiency out of the system, because, you know, this body, the audit committee, has neither the ability to set priorities or raise money or do any of the things that are gonna help. But I think the city council could give direction to staff to say, you know, in addition to implementing some of the suggestions that you've made, that one of the things we could do is say, come back to council, here's a list of the 25 things council asked us to do, you still wanna do this, in light of the fact that we have resource constraints, that we have, resource restraints, monetary restraints, that sort of thing. And maybe in that way, at least get a handle on some of this, or make it a smaller project to try and work on. So that would be my thinking about it, because I do think I looked at this list and I'm like, holy cow, I can't remember the last time anyone even mentioned putting in a dog park at Reed Park kind of thing. So maybe Bill has, but I mean, I think that's a thing is, you know, and maybe it stays a priority. I'm just saying that I think it was adopted so long ago, it's unclear whether or not that still remains a council priority. So I think some of that could be brought back to council for either reaffirmation or saying, no, in light of changed circumstances, we don't want to do that anymore.
Yep, I think that'd be a great process, and then having the risk, or the priority ranking from those departments, because it may be a low ranking now versus high before.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Can you remember?
So it appears, I've heard that we're behind on software and programs over and over again for the last 2 years. Planning, permits, other areas as well. How long or how backlogged is the software and technology issues? Are these running just since the pandemic, or were a lot of these problems endemic earlier?
I'll defer, maybe Oscar would know, sort of the long-term perspective. I can definitely say that with the pandemic, a lot of our technology woes were exacerbated because we deferred funding to many of our technology programs during the pandemic, but I'll let Oscar, because he's more close to it, and sort of talk about the long-term of your perspective.
We also, for many years, we purchased systems that were what we call perpetual on-site systems, where they didn't require ongoing subscription costs. Now the environment for IT has changed, where you buy a system, you're subscribing to it. So now you're paying annually the subscription cost. That's about a quarter of the cost of the system that you were buying. And so we inherited all these systems that we had for many years, and now they're no longer supported, so we're upgrading these systems. And now it's costing us more money because we're behind the scene. We're behind on the technology now.
So we should have been, I guess what I'm asking is, am I extrapolating that we should have been doing this all along so that we're not behind, and should have been modernizing constantly?
Yes, I think that's one of the.
And I understand what you said about, look at
we bought systems that we didn't think we were gonna have to
Exactly.
monkey with, but the reality of technology is changing constantly and there are new systems out there.
You know, one of the things that we also did with the systems is we customized them to a place where you can't just upgrade the system from the manufacturer because they're so specific to us. And so now you're having to buy a new system to get the same functionality because the vendor will no longer support your system. So that's also part of it. Through legacy systems, we've kind of made them our own, modified them in a way that they're no longer supported.
So we need to be smarter going forward.
We are, yeah, we are. And so we're trying to do that, and we do that through the subscription services. Now, you rarely modify a system to customize so much that, the vendor doesn't let you do that. And so now you ask them what functionality you need, they either provide the functionality or give you some kind of connector to it to provide the functionality, and then you pay an annual subscription so that your system is upgraded on a regular basis.
Okay, because I've heard that in other ways as well throughout our systems. Councilmember Davis had a good point, and possibly every 24 months or it should be just a regular function of Public Works and other departments with the City Council to look at CIP projects and see what we conceivably still want to do and where we are with the items. And that appears to be an important step, because aren't we somewhere close to $500 million right now?
Yep, about 459 million of backlog projects right now.
That's not good. So even though, yes, the dog park isn't that old, and I think that's still a great solution to Reed Park, but there are other projects on there that can be modified or looked at so that the backlog shrinks and becomes constantly updated and more current. I think that's a great idea as well, Councilwoman. The last thing on that is, as we're prioritizing the emergency CIP projects that have to be moved forward on, how do we actually step those up through the queue? Because I think, David, you just mentioned that all we're really doing right now is trying to just keep our heads above water. I'm paraphrasing, but keep our heads above water on projects.
So I think there's a couple of moments. I mean, obviously, when we come to council, when we do the biennial CIP, that's certainly an opportunity for feedback about what projects to prioritize. But honestly, I mean, the big constraint is funding, and so one of the things that the Public Works Department is leading, and this is at the direction of City Council, is to think about, going to the voters in 26 with a bond measure that would provide the capital to allow us to really advance and move forward with a number of projects that are important to the community and to the council.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a quick question regarding process. In terms of change orders, when you go into a contract with a vendor and then they have change orders, what is the specific language, on a contract or, RFP with a contractor in terms of change orders? Is there something that says you can only, X amount percentage of the contract, that you can add to it, or is there language on the actual contracts?
So the contract does not spell out a limit as to what the change order amount is. All we get from City Council is the authority of the contract plus typically 10% or 15%. And then the amount that's in the contract is actually just what they bid on.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have in our back pockets the 10 or 15% in case there is an unforeseen condition or there's a legitimate change order. So we have that authority up to 10 or 15%. But there's no language in the contract per se that says you get up to 10 or 15% of your bid price on top of it.
Because doesn't it seem, and this is me just spitballing, but doesn't it seem like they take advantage of that, contractors historically, or is that just the nature of where we are today?
No, it's typical to find unforeseen conditions on a project. It's not, I don't see it as contractors taking advantage of it in general. Certainly there are contractors out there that lowball their bid and then they have a list of contract or change orders that they already are targeting. But those are far and few between, in my opinion.
Okay. I'm just curious, just because it just, you know, it comes across our desk so frequently, or on our desk, or agenda, or what have you, you know, or we're, you know, constantly looking at like, gosh, you know, but I'm just curious, just because of where we are. Okay,
And I
thank
can
you for that.
weigh in, I'm a
Yeah, please,
construction auditor by trade, so,
please, chime in.
yeah, so I mean, for the smaller projects, you can always have audit rights to your contracts, and you're probably saying, what does that have to do with change orders? But having the visibility within the actual cost detail, I think can be helpful. For bigger projects, you can structure them with a guaranteed maximum price contract with full audit rights. We did a contract consultation for you guys a few years back on the GMP to enhance kind of clarity around the cost of work definitions. For change orders specifically, you can have change orders. You can't you can't define kind of thresholds, but you can have really good language that it's got to be at actual cost. They're fully auditable. If they submit an estimate and it doesn't translate to actual cost, you can recoup it. So I think you can get some more teeth into your contracts around change orders. And I think the reporting of change orders is critical, because if you do have a project that's over 5-6%, if it's a new build, like what happened in the design process that's causing the change order. If it's something that's kind of like a rehab with a lot of unknowns, you know, like unforeseen conditions, okay, maybe, but let's make sure the costs are tight, they're not charging excessive rates, et cetera. So, yeah, I think change orders high risk area, but there's some tools you can implement to kind of identify them early on to figure out if there's a process issue, or making sure that it's fully auditable so that it's not more profit than there should be in there.
Appreciate that.
Yep.
Yeah, you're not, I don't know who we're talking, if we can take note of that, that would be really great. What else? And then in terms of, I know that we use Munis, correct? And so I was just thinking about, you know, potentially when we're looking at reporting, and for CIP reporting, just to check to see if there may potentially be a module to be able to track that. That would be really great to find out. Because that's what you were asking, Phil, about, you know, a different, oh my gosh, so tired. About different programs. And so the different programs, they have different modules that you can buy into. And so, but oftentimes you buy the program, and by the time you personalize it out, it's time for a new one again. Or they promise that this system will speak to another system you have. By the time you try to integrate it, it doesn't. And so, you know, I've been involved in that process at my city that I work at, and it's not fun. But anyhow, but they do have different modules. And so maybe they have. I was trying to look it up, but I don't know. But anyway.
Yeah, I don't know that our Munis system, do you know if they have a plugin for CAP project management?
Not that I've heard of, but whether, you know, ISDs come to us with.
And that's the challenge, is that our ERP is financial stream, and so this is project management, so it had to be a different system that we would integrate with our title users.
Yeah, because I know that at least like, you know, Culver City, I mean, we not only use it for the financial, we also use it for like the permitting modules. So we have both of those, so we use it for permitting, inspection, finance, and then, yeah, so we use it for all kinds of different things, so. There may be, I don't know. Anyways, thank you so much, appreciate it. Any more questions?
I have a few questions. This was an extraordinarily kind of eye-opening report, and I want to thank you for the thoroughness that you put into this report. Just to give some context, we talk about taking projects off the priority list. Kind of a fun fact is that the unfunded list has been growing by leaps and bounds. So in the fiscal year, the 2-year fiscal period ending fiscal year 22, the unfunded list totaled $112 million. In the following 2-year period, the unfunded list totaled $283 million. And in this 2-year biennial process, we're at $459 million. That's in addition to the fact that approved budgets during that 4-year period, 5-year period, is $440 million. So projects are coming onto the list way faster than they're being actually removed from the list, either through a editing exercise or actually a project completion exercise. So I think that should inform the context about trying to think about prioritizing the projects that get on the list. It looks like it's a river of projects that are it's accelerating. It's a 62% increase from the prior 2-year period. And it was more than 100% increase from the period before that. So I'm going to ask you a really stupid question. I should know the answer to this question. All of these, the total city budget of $750 million, right? That includes all the capital as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so capital is a subset of that total city budget. Got it. Just wanted to make sure. In going through the report, there were a couple comments that kind of caught my attention. On page 6, you note that the report notes that efforts are being made to return to pre-pandemic reporting levels, including an end-of-year status update on all in-progress capital projects. The most recent year-end report was submitted in January of 2018. So that's a year-end report. Then there was another comment that was made. It says, Moss Adams requested project reporting documentation for this project. Now, I'm assuming this project is this report. No reporting that included cost activity for the year and itemized budget approvals was available. So, does that mean that is it maintained anywhere, or it was just not available for any other projects?
That comment's related to the performance reporting. We didn't observe any performance reporting for the projects that we had sampled.
Okay. So, again, so $440 million has been approved from FY22 through FY26. When you look at a 5%, let's say we control costs by 5% on a biennial period, right? What you're looking at is something on the order of $3 to $5 million a year in potential cost savings by actually managing the cost. If you're looking at the approved capital period from 23 to 26, which is the current approved periods, it has some actuals in there. A 5% improvement on the cost would generate $21 million of free cash flow to spend on other things in the budget. A 10% improvement would be $42 million. So the fact that costs aren't being tracked and performance reports can't be provided, given the magnitude of the money being spent, to me, has to be eye-opening. Have you seen this in other cities to this degree?
My range is very skewed just because I see everything. But yeah, we've seen organizations that don't have reporting. We always recommend to have it at least quarterly, at the minimum, so that you can evaluate the projects. But yeah, absent the reporting, it's unclear how projects are performing or how do you detect and mitigate risk early on. It's the reporting, I find, pays for itself. If you can get it automated with it not being a resource burden, if you can get the data, then you're able to figure out where to go, or to kind of figure out what projects are not performing well, get the justification for it, and get more eyes on it. Without performance reporting, it's hard to kind of figure out how projects are performing, or if they're performing to schedule or budget.
So another question I have is, all the numbers in here are budget numbers, approved budget numbers, right? But the thing is, capital projects by their nature span periods of time. How does the city manage its cash flow? If it's not actually tracking a project's performance, and it's not actually tracking actual expenditures, and projects are crossing time periods, how is the city, I mean, is there a concern about the city's ability to manage its cash flow so that it knows where it's at any point in time?
I'll defer to Oscar.
Yeah, I mean, we're tracking project expenditures. He's talking about performance in terms of what percentage complete, are you behind, the timeline and so forth, but all the numbers are in the.
No, but I mean, if you get unexpected overruns, all of a sudden, oops, that's gonna chew up cash that you were gonna use on something else, right?
Right, but we've already allocated that budget that council approved. And so if you approve $3 million for a project, we're not going above $3 million. That's been accounted for in the books and in our budget.
Well, for example, again, I get back to my favorite project, which is the Arcadia Water Project. And in 2019, it was a $46 million project, and by the time it got done in 2022, it was a $78 million project, right? And again, there was no performance reporting on that, and so it was overrun after overrun. So I understand that somehow things are being jiggered, right, to basically, meet the cash requirements. But again, that means that without performance reporting, which is another issue that I won't get into, as far as the finance function isn't doing the performance reporting, Public Works is doing the performance reporting, is that correct?
They oversee the.
They oversee it, so they oversee the definition of the project, the performance reporting of the project, the financial performance of the project. And there's no third-party oversight or third-party department oversight to basically act as a referee in this process.
So I think to your first point about the costs going from 40 to 72 million, is probably the change in scope, right? There was probably more things that needed to be added to the project. So not the original project that you're looking at, I guess you would have to look at the project scope for the original 40 million and see if the same thing was delivered for 70 million. So I think the project.
No, I understand that, but again, even trying to find the original budget on something like that was a huge challenge. But again, they asked for performance reporting, they couldn't find any. One of the concerns I have is, we've been talking about financial systems. I've done a lot of financial systems implementations in my life. Part of the problem is you need systems to feed information into. You just don't take a capital project system off the shelf, plug it in, and it runs. It has to then feed off of all the different systems you have in the company or in the city in order to then generate the outputs, right? If those systems are broken, or if those systems are no longer supported, right, you're not going to be able to get a capital system in that's actually functioning. So, and I realize you just hired a head of your IT group, right? Where is kind of rationalizing and understanding where you guys are at? Where is that on their roadmap? Because that is the critical path issue for you guys to actually get a functioning control process in place. So is that somewhere near the top of their list?
So what is definitely on the top of his list right now is immersing himself in the organization and doing due diligence. And I will tell you, while he's not completed his assessment, he is deeply understanding how far behind we are in a number of systems and in terms of also pursuing future technologies. One other point I just want to make, you talked about the savings, if we could just save 5% or 10% of our capital budget. I just would ask for some discipline about understanding that capital projects are in different funds. So it's not like it's $40 million of savings, just free cash flow to spend as you may wish. You got the Big Blue Bus Fund that has capital projects, the Water Fund that has capital projects. So I just want to make sure we're understanding that those savings are shared across a lot of different funds, some of which are restricted in their use, just to make sure that there's some discipline and understanding of that concept.
And some are grants that wouldn't be savings.
Right, but your general fund, is basically driving, it's been scaled back significantly, but it's it's projected to get up to 15 million out of the total of $102 million capital spend. But, again, money is money at the end of the day. So, one of the concerns I have is, to the extent that, the control environment is extraordinarily challenging. And when I look at, to your point, when I look at the unfunded projects list, it looks like a lot of those things are general fund projects. They're not, there's a huge amount of parks and everything else in there. So, to the extent that the control environment is extraordinarily challenged at this point, I would think twice before trying to put a bond measure up without first fixing the control environment. $500 million in this control environment would seem to be kind of a very questionable path to take. So as far as prioritization, if we want to prioritize projects, prioritizing the control environment fix, I think should be like number one on the list. It's just huge. I have a lot more questions on this, but I don't want to take everybody's time. What I'd like to do is submit the questions to the clerk, as I did for the homeless study, and I don't know who else I have to submit it to, and I have copies for everybody here. And what happened the last time was that those questions were then answered by staff and then posted on the Audit Subcommittee website. That would be a great outcome, I think, for this, rather than trying to use everyone's time to get into minutia, because I think there's a lot of interrelated issues that do need to be addressed, that this report has highlighted, and that's what I would really like to conclude this agenda item with. So with that, these are the questions that, yeah, just a minute.
I just would like to ask this committee, as you look through these questions, if there are any questions that you would prioritize over others, understanding our limited staff resources, if there are questions that are most pressing than others, as you go through this.
I would suggest that someone who's familiar with the process should be able to more or less read through these questions. Okay, so let's get back to the agenda.
All right, thank you. And keep us in mind,
okay.
we live in this world, so let us know how we can support you guys on data sharing, best practices, what other people are doing. Just always keep us in mind. We want to support you guys however we can.
Absolutely. I just have one final comment on this agenda item. The growth in the capital and the growth in the across the city, and looking at the unfunded projects list in the general fund, I would also, if I were managing this, really want to take a look at the growth in the general fund's revenue and compare that against the demands that appear to be accumulating against those resources. Because right now, the general fund is growing at a compound annual growth rate of something like less than 4% when you look at it over the last 3 or 4 years. And these kinds of numbers, and in Moss Adams' report, they note that inflation is a huge challenge in all of these projects. So you add that to the absolute growth in projects, and one of the questions is where's that money going to be coming from, especially in the general fund. The other funds, you have other options, but I just would like to point that out. That to me was a very, very bright red light in looking at how this stuff was kind of unspooling. So anyways, but thank you.
Chair Burrell, I would recommend we make a motion to file and receive the report.
I think that's a great idea. Would somebody like to, make the motion to file and receive the report?
So moved. I'll second.
So moved by, Subcommittee Member Bush, seconded by, Subcommittee Member Brock. Voice vote, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? None, it passes unanimously.
So next item is item 5D, progress report on findings and observations of internal audit.
Can we get the staff presentation, please? It's like you knew this was coming.
Already.
Sorry, Oscar, give me a minute.
No problem.
Is it PowerPoint or is it PDF?
So PowerPoint.
This one? No. This one?
That one. Okay, so,
Sorry,
okay.
it's not set up like it used to.
All right, so I'm providing an update on the internal audit report, the findings, and our progress on those. So here's the numbers at a glance. Total findings and observations, 255. We have 8 active reports. Total recommendations were 372. We've completed 326 of those, so we're 88% completed. And then only 2 items were completed since the last quarter. We have 23 items in progress and 23 items pending. So no major changes to report on the fleet efficiency and the fleet utilization findings or recommendations. The annual customer survey has been developed, and we're working with the IT department on the asset work implementation, the system implementation. The goal of the survey is to help identify areas for improvement and to monitor performance measures. On the fleet utilization, progress is pending due to staffing levels. And we are expected that once we secure the resources to be able to help us with this, we'll have some progress on this. So again, no major changes to report here. We're still in the same status as last quarter. The computer equipment replacement program, we've started our governance plan. That got started on quarter 1 of 2024. We've conducted interviews and focus groups with the department heads and various departments, and we've initiated the templates for the development of a governance plan. We're estimated to complete this project in March of 2025. In addition to that, we've started our IT management system implementation, and we've updated our date to be completed in 2025 as opposed to 2024. So this is the computer equipment replacement fund review. For the HR organizational assessment, no major changes from the previous quarter. A lot of work was done up to quarter 3. And so right now we hired a new HR director, and she's focused on keeping the lights on and really keeping us providing support to staff with all the current hiring and recruiting. The mobility assessment, no changes again to report. There's 3 items that are currently outstanding, and those will all be addressed in the next annual report, which will be released at the end of this calendar year. And the goal is to close out all the reports and the findings by next quarter. Permitting efficiency study, we've executed a contract for the permitting system. That was signed in September 2024. Implementation has started, and it's estimated to take 18 months to complete. So again, the project is initiated, and we're in discovery stages right now and planning for the project to continue to move on. Airport we've had two updates, two report findings that were completed this quarter. We're conducting cross-training on staff and multiple functions to increase efficiency within that, within the unit. Staff is also working closely to develop a comprehensive 5-year preventative maintenance plan so that we can define our capital improvement project funding based on the maintenance plan. And so this one had two progress items. And then nothing to report on this one. This was 100% complete. And so that completes my report.
Do we have any questions of the finance director on his report? No questions. Do we have a motion to file and receive the report?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Oscar.
Now moving on to item 6A, Audit Subcommittee member discussion items. Overview and status on the recommendation of the Moss Adams Homeless Study dated November 14, 2022, final issued on November 30, 2022, related to observations and recommendations, strategy and planning, data collection and analysis.
Good evening, Audit Subcommittee members. My name is Lachey Stevenson. I'm the Acting Administrator of the Homelessness Prevention and Intervention Team in the Human Services Division, which is located in the Housing and Human Services Department. So there's an observation that the Moss Adams had in their homelessness study that was dated November 14, 2022, related to data collection and access. The first observation is that the city systems to collect data storage across city-funded programs and services are siloed. This limits the city's ability to accurately assess performance in a timely and meaningful manner. And I don't have a formal presentation, so I'm just, okay. So recommendation A from Moss Adams was in the short term to pursue options to integrate data from first responders and the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, to enable improved reporting and or pursue mechanisms that support accuracy and expand communication across teams. And this is my response to that recommendation. Currently, and due to restrictions beyond the city's control, departments cannot directly access data. For example, first responders cannot access data in the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, and non-first responders, like myself, cannot access data in databases into which first responders enter store their data. However, departments regularly share data so that we can allocate resources effectively and efficiently. Examples include the Housing and Human Services Department Homelessness Prevention Intervention Team, or the HPI team, shares city-funded shelter census on a weekly basis, and Department of Mental Health Therapeutic Transport Team data on a monthly basis. The Public Works Public Landscape Division shares homeless count data from the beach, parks, and major boulevards like Santa Monica and Wilshire on a monthly basis. And the Santa Monica Police Department Homeless Liaison Program, or the HELP team, shares heat maps on calls for service related to homelessness on a weekly basis. The Housing and Human Services Department and the Information Services Department are meeting, they just got an email about it today, regarding the design of a new dashboard that effectively supports and reports on our efforts in addressing homelessness. In other words, taking the data from various departments and integrating it in a way that a dashboard will reflect what our efforts are to address street homelessness. And that meeting will include understanding the key challenges around data integration, understanding the types of data we currently collect, the desired outcome or improvement we hope to achieve by integrating our data, and critical metrics that we want to track. Recommendation B. In the long term, evaluate the appropriate mechanism to integrate first responder data into the HMIS to enhance data accuracy, completeness, and performance reporting. Again, there are limitations to integrating first responder data into HMIS. However, we can integrate data from the Housing and Human Services Department, Public Works Department, and Santa Monica Police Department, and other departments, but those are the main ones I mentioned that work to address street homelessness, to create a dashboard that reflects our combined efforts to reduce street homelessness. In addition, the homelessness strategic plan, which is scheduled to go to City Council in March 11th of 2025, includes 2 objectives and 10 performance measures related to sharing and ideally integrating interdepartmental data. That is my short presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes. Or,
Thank you for that presentation, informative and brief, appreciate it. So just, I'm very curious about, because I understand there's a lot of different people collecting data and different types of data, and I understand that information that is relevant to one entity like a first responder versus, housing and human services is different. And so, but with that being said, what data is being collected?
Good question. And I actually think the data that we collect is really relevant to one another. I think the issue is that due to limitations in the database that we can't, I can't directly access police data and police can't directly access HMIS data. But I do think the data is relevant to all of us, which is why we're currently sharing data in the way that we do. And we collect quite a lot of data. I could, list a lot. Obviously we collect things in terms of our department. We collect, the outreach team's work in the field, the number of folks they contact, the number of services provided, the number of people that they place. The housing division obviously collects information on the number of vouchers that are utilized and the number of people that retain housing. Police collect data on the number of folks that they engage in the street and how many citations that they write or advisals that they do or arrests that they do regarding quality of life issues. Public Works, as I said, they do homeless counts and they collect data on, things related to encampments and the tons of debris, which is astronomical, that they, pick up related to that. So there's actually a lot of data collecting going on. And it's just that, departments are collecting it on their own in their various systems. But like I said, I think there's a way, and we've talked to ISD about this, that of taking the data elements that are related specifically to homelessness and putting into some sort of dashboard that's not only helpful to us, but also helpful to the public in terms of the efforts that we're making to address issues related to homelessness.
Right, and then thank you for that. Because I work on dashboards too, and I work with our GIS team. And so, we're always looking for things that are measurable, right? So what type of items are you looking, because I know you're just starting to build this out, right? And what types of things are you looking at to measure from that data? Do you have any idea yet, or?
Well, I think it's things that we're already measuring. I think the ideas and the kind of the point of this observation, these recommendations from the Moss Adams homelessness study, is that it's not integrated in a way that, is useful to either us internally or to the public externally. And so, I think very kind of top level things that are important to collect are like how many people that we're providing services to in the street. How many of those people are going into treatment? How many are going into interim housing, permanent housing, getting connected to benefits, getting connected to employment? I'm not going to speak for other departments, but in terms of the data that I think is important to us, those would be some basic ones. And again, those are all things that are collected in HMIS, but I think the bottom line is like, how do we integrate that data with what's coming from Public Works and from police and other folks that are working either directly or indirectly with people experiencing street homelessness, again, in a way that's user-friendly to us and to the public at large.
And then also, are you, and because you have so many different systems, is each department touching them at the same time? And do you know if each other's touching, when I say, touching them,
yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? But are you touching them at the same time and not knowing if each other is doing it? Or do
You mean, are we
have
serving the same people at the same time?
People, yeah.
We are certainly serving the same people at the same time, and I think
it.
in terms, that's something I failed to mention, thank you. We have bi-weekly meetings with various departments. It's led by the PD's help team, but Public Works is there, the library there, the farmer's market there, obviously we're there. There's lots of different departments, and we talk about kind of trends that are happening in terms of street homelessness, and then we drill down to specific people that we're working with, kind of our top 10 folks that everyone is working with. And yes, we realize that we are typically working with the same people. Yeah, and the dashboard that I'm referring to, just to be clear, is not gonna drill down to obviously client level, but more kind of overall, what are the various departments doing to address homelessness, and again, kind of, integrating that data in a user-friendly format.
And that's really helpful to understand, because I always wonder whether we're duplicating efforts. Because it seems like we have all these great teams doing a lot of great work, but it also feels often that we're duplicating efforts. And so I'm always very curious about how we're utilizing our resources and how can we better utilize our resources. And so, so I'm very curious to see how this dashboard, pans out, and how we're able to see what we're doing, in the bigger picture, if you will. So.
Yes, and I totally agree with you. We don't want to duplicate efforts. The city does. We want to make sure that the resources we spend are done, effectively. And part of that, not to drill down too deeply, but part of those meetings is to figure out who is going to take the lead, because it doesn't make sense for multiple teams to be serving the same person.
And that's something that I've said since day one,
Yeah.
4 years ago, is that we needed to know who's who at the zoo.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of those things that Londa's made fun of me, but I literally, with our vice mayor, I literally sat down with her one day with a dry erase board, and I said,
yeah,
because that's what we do with the fire department, and I started drawing things out. I'm like, we need to figure this out.
Right. Agreed.
So, and that's when we came to the audit committee and said, we need to do this. And so I'm grateful to see this come to fruition, and
Me too.
excited to see what it looks like. So
Thank you.
for your report.
Sure, thanks.
Any other questions?
Yes.
A couple of quick questions.
Sure.
Is the reason the data is inaccessible from one department to another, is that a systems issue?
Yeah, it has to do with, the homeless management information system, which is run by LASA. They don't allow first responders to access it. I think it has to do with making sure that the data isn't potentially used inappropriately. And then vice versa, I just know from working with the police department on a daily basis that, I can't have access to their system. So that's more the issue. It's not that, it's more a system issue, to answer your question, yes.
So therefore, every department has to figure out every department has to figure out what data it should request, and each department might be requesting different data.
Well, the good news is we share it proactively, so it's not like I ask the help team, can you send me the heat map so we can make sure that the outreach teams are deployed to the places where there's the most calls for service. They proactively give that to me on a weekly basis. I share the census at our city-funded shelter that the first responders fill those beds proactively, so they know how many beds are available for them to fill. Public Works does the same thing with their homeless count. So it's a proactive thing. We don't actually have to ask one another. We just do that proactively.
And the last question, you mentioned March of 2025, and there could be 10 or so key performance indicators approved. Have the KPIs that are in development now, or what's the status of that?
And I just want to, the 2 objectives and the 10 performance measures I referenced in my brief presentation are specifically related to data collection and integration. So there's a lot of other objectives and performance measures, but those are the ones that are specifically focused on
So
this.
those are not related to how effective we are in addressing homelessness. It's more how effective we are in terms of collecting data?
Correct, but the other parts of the homelessness strategic plan do address your issue of the effectiveness of our homelessness response.
So would there be KPIs identified for the other part of the study?
Yes, absolutely.
And maybe this is a scoping issue, but is that something that the audit committee would see? Or we go to council first?
I will defer to people above my pay grade for that answer.
The KPIs for those two. I'm sorry,
Or
I
whether-
won't follow you around. The KPIs as it relates to the effectiveness of the homeless programs, or the programs that are used to address homelessness, will those KPIs be presented and discussed at the audit committee first, or do those go straight to council?
No, the homeless strategic plan goes straight to the council.
Yes.
A quick question for you. Have you looked at, so in LA County, we obviously have problems between different disciplines, sharing on a systematic basis. Are other counties in California the same way across the nation? Are there better systems? Are there better ways to be advocates for a system that meshes well together? Because it sounds to me as if, yes, your meetings are having to identify people, identify what's going on, and try and mesh those together a lot of times orally, instead of what you really want is people in the field to be able to look at each system, look at what's going on, and be able to say, this is working over here, this person needs more help here.
Yeah, I mean,
Is it an LA County issue or is it a statewide issue? Are there other places when you even casually look that seem to be more integrated to the systems to really be able to go out and help people collect data that has worthiness?
Yeah, I mean, LA County is very unusual as just because of the scope of our, not only the scope of our homeless problem, but just the, how large of a county we are. The good thing about the city of Santa Monica is we're relatively small, and our departments, at least in my opinion, I'm a long-term Santa Monica resident, but relatively new to the city. I've been here 2 years. My experience is that our departments actually work quite closely together. And so it is, and like I said, we do a lot of proactive reporting to one another. But I can't say that I know a city or a county that does a better job of integrating data. One of the things with the homeless management information system, it is a HUD required database that has to meet HUD standards. And so LA County, like other counties, and the city of Santa Monica, like other cities, are kind of beholden to those standards. So I don't know how much, quite honestly, flexibility there is in that. And if even people wanted to be better integrated, that they could, just because of the, yeah.
Can you confirm that we're now in the process of switching to the same HMIS system as the county as well, so we'll be on one same platform?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I'm so immersed in that project sometimes I forget that other people don't know about it. So on November 12th, we successfully migrated all of our program enrollment data from our city-managed HMIS called Service Point to the LAHSA-managed HMIS called Clarity. And so that was phase 1. We're now in phase 2, where we're going to migrate all the case notes and the services. And so the idea will be by early 2025, we will just be in one database, which is very exciting because not only do we only have one database to reference, but our providers only have one database to enter data into, and it maximizes their ability to see what you're talking about, Councilmember Rock, to see like, oh, this person that is in front of me is actually working with someone else, with either another provider on the west side, or maybe they were in, Hollywood yesterday working with a provider, now they just happen to be here, reconnecting them to providers. It also allows us to maximize referrals. It'll allow us to maximize vouchers. It'll have a lot of ancillary benefits.
It'll help minimize paperwork too, because there's a lot of duplication then in what has to be filled out, which means that your time isn't being used as efficiently as it could be.
Correct, yes. I mean, as it is, prior to November 12th, I have to check two databases every time someone said, do you know this client? And I only have to check one, so yes, that's a 50% reduction. I'm very excited about. Sure, thanks.
So I have a few questions. Thank you for the presentation. So I'm a little confused. In the Moss Adams report, the HMIS system was called Wellski. Then it's been called Service Point. And now we're going to Clarity. Can you kind of clarify what that's all about?
Sure, that's a good question. WellSky and Service Point are essentially the same. Sorry, I reference it as Service Point. I think WellSky is like the parent company, if you will, but for folks like myself on the ground, we reference it as Service Point, but those are the same thing, so they're not different systems. I don't want to imply that they are. And that was the city managed database, and the city decided to move to that. And actually, years ago, I was on the HMIS committee for the city and worked with other providers to decide to move to that system.
The Wellski system.
Exactly, yes. And shortly thereafter, LAHSA moved to Clarity. I think when the city just, made that change, LAHSA had not made their change. And at the time, WellSky was a better system. LAHSA moved to Clarity, and ever since, I think there's been conversation about, whether or not the city should also move to Clarity. I can certainly see why the city wants to
So when you migrate your data to the LASA system, will Santa Monica's, will people, will unique individuals identified as being in Santa Monica, will that be a subset that can be queried and summarized so Santa Monica knows what its throughput is at any point in time, or is that something that LASA is going to provide us on some canned report or something? I mean, how does that? Are we going to lose the ability to understand what's happening in our 8.4 square miles?
No, because we'll be able to run reports, like we know the outreach teams that are in the city, we know the interim housing programs in the city, so we'll be able to run reports on those outreach teams, those interim housing programs, to be able to know, who's in our city, not only who's being served on the streets, but also who's being served in our interim housing programs.
One of the things that the Moss Adams report noted was that the data analyst and the data manager had been let go, and that was really hampering the department's ability to understand what was in the data. Has that been rectified? Has there been a different solution implemented so that there is, someone who's managing that data on a real-time basis?
So the data manager and data analyst positions have not been restored, although the Human Services Division, which is the division I work in, we share a data analyst with our housing division, and that person's been very helpful in various things. We also contract with a company called Pathways, and so they are the ones that have been I'm the project lead on this data migration project, and they've been extremely helpful in assisting me with the project and with testing the data and running reports and that kind of thing. So while we don't have a data manager or data analyst, we have a contract with Pathways that provides that service.
So I did a public records request back in 2023, actually I did two of them, asking for the number of unique individuals in Santa Monica coming out of our HMIS system. Now I'm assuming that Wellski/Service Point was HUD approved. It was HUD compliant,
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. So what I got back was unique individuals in 2018 was 6,405. In 19 it was 6,152. In 2020 it was 4,716. 21 it was 3,000. 22 was 651, and then no data after that. So and that compares to roughly 800, a point in time count of around 800 in each one of those years. So my question is, I have no idea, it wasn't clear why the data couldn't be supplied after 2022. The other question is, how, as far as data validity is concerned, how is that data validated to make sure that what you're looking at is basically not just a subset, but it's for example, as best as can be provided, the entire population that you're studying, right? So I was concerned that, this thing goes from 6,651 and disappears. So as far as unique individuals tracking through the city, has that process been validated? Are you guys comfortable that process works?
So I think one of the benefits to us being in Clarity, and as I referenced earlier, we can see that there are people who are, say, experiencing homelessness in Santa Monica today are actually just came here from another city and they're not actually here long term. And so I think one of the things, for example, that an outreach team will do is if they're working with someone but they haven't had contact with them in spite of their efforts to find them or other, reaching out to other providers to find them haven't, then they would close them out. So that we're not reporting on people that it seems like are no longer in the city. I mean, as you can imagine, homeless folks are very transient, so they may be here today and in another city tomorrow or next week or next month. And so that's one way in which there are controls put in place so that people are closing folks out if they're not having any sort of contact with them. And other providers that they work with are not having contact with them in the city. So to your question, so that we can drill down to the people that are like actually experiencing homelessness in the city, that our providers are actually working with in real time. Not someone that they worked with last month, but somebody that they worked with yesterday.
But do you have, in other words, is the system capable of giving you on an annual basis what the throughput is in the system, right? I mean, a point in time count is just that, a point in time, right? And so what this implies is that people are in town for about 2 months and then they're out. So is the system designed and can it be used to actually extract that information to inform how we are creating, how the city is creating policies? If the city is creating policies that assume a static population, but in fact, it's an almost entirely transient population, those policies are not gonna, they're gonna fail. So the question is the system being used in a way where unique individuals through time in every year are being tracked, and as well as, those individuals that are popping up, with service requests and those kinds of things. I mean, do you guys have a grip on that? Is that something that is core to your reporting so that you understand the nature of the problem so that the policies can be tailored to that problem?
Yes, I mean, I will have to say data is, there's good data and there's bad data. And that's why I mentioned kind of the control about making sure that if you don't have contact with someone for a certain period of time, that you close them out of the program, because it typically means that they're not around for whatever reason. And so since we just integrated literally a week ago today, I would have to say that we would need to have time. So to answer your question, yes, we can extract that information. Are there times where maybe it indicates that an outreach team is working with more people than it currently is because they haven't closed them out due to that 30-day rule? Yes. I think it's less so with like an interim housing program because that's based on bed count. When someone's not there, someone's been discharged from the program. So yes, it is possible to extract that kind of data. And I think we need to be in a constant process of kind of quality improvement to make sure that the data in there accurately reflects the situation on our streets.
Okay. I have no more questions. Would someone like to accept the file?
Sure, I'll move to accept.
Second. Well, second. Voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, was that Vice Chair Bush who made the second?
Yes, yes.
Moving on to item 6B, request that the internal auditor work plan for fiscal year 2025-2026 include a review of the internal controls around the procurement process and policies.
So is there a staff presentation, or is this is an item I think I put on the agenda? I would just like to make a motion that this be included in the internal auditor work plan for the 25-26 project listing that they have. My idea around this is that as we heard from LSL, internal audits, the annual audit does not really focus on internal controls. And so one of the things that is, there's a lot of procurement that happens in the city, and the council is required to approve amounts over a certain level. And this item is just to have a very specific internal audit testing of those controls to make sure that council is getting, is to make sure that the qualifying expenditure amounts are getting to the council as per the council's policies. And so this way, again, because it's not covered on the annual audits, I think, in my mind, it's an important thing that should be, and from what I can tell, it hasn't been tested in quite some time, but specifically tested for the upcoming internal audit schedule. That's my idea. That's why it's on the agenda. Are there any questions?
Just a clarifying question, are you saying that there is a policy in place now that
Yes.
requires, okay.
Yes. So this is an audit to make sure that that policy is being followed. This is a controls audit.
Have we identified any past problems with this?
We haven't seen any past problems, but since internal controls are not tested specifically in the annual audits, it's not clear to me that problems would get surfaced in a timely manner. So this is just kind of a belt and suspenders approach.
Can I ask the city manager, do you have any thoughts on this?
You were gonna jump in.
Yeah,
Or
so,
Oscar?
yeah, so, a few months ago, Los Adams kind of asked us what the work plan should be, and we identified the cash handling as a project for them with their controls. This could be something that we do put for the next work plan. I think I'm also interested in testing those controls, right? So yeah, I think.
Oscar and I have discussed this, and
Alright, then I'm fine with it.
So the motion would be to include in the FY 25-26 internal audit work schedule a program to test the procurement process and policies. That would be the motion. Do I have a second?
Sure.
Subcommittee member Brock seconds the motion. Voice vote, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? It passes unanimously, thank you.
And item 6C, request that council have a discussion around the scope of responsibilities of the audit subcommittee, including discussion regarding, including audit subcommittee comments to all internal audit reports as attachments, and that those reports be submitted along with the comments to city council. And 2, the recommendation that staff report content and the financial impacts and budget actions of staff reports include analysis and projections related to the financial impacts of the city's general fund from both direct and indirect consequences of actions, including 1, next steps in the case of study session reports, and 2, recommended actions in the case of all staff reports.
Thank you. This item, both C1 and 2 were put on at my request. And let me explain my rationale for number 1. Moss Adams is putting together some good work, some good reports. We saw a very good report today. One of the things that it gets filed and it goes to council, but my concern is that to the extent the audit subcommittee members have reviewed it and identified issues, it's not clear to me that those comments that would accompany that report ever get to the council. And so this item simply says that perhaps rather than having 3 days to review the Moss Adams report as we do now, where it comes in on Thursday and then we have the meeting on the Tuesday, that perhaps the Moss Adams report comes in a week earlier, and that it gives a chance for the audit subcommittee members to comment on that report, and those comments included in a separate report that goes to the council along with the file of the Moss Adams report, simply so that the council has the audit subcommittee's point of view on what is in that report. I'm not suggesting that the report is anything as far as the production of that report has changed. It's just the audit subcommittee's comments, if any, get included in the submission to the council.
I have a question.
Yes.
Just so I'm clear, are you suggesting that individual members of the audit subcommittee submit comments and council would see the comments of each of the individual members? Or are you suggesting that we discuss the report and whatever comments as a collective body we decide to include, that would go to council?
I would be open to either. I'm trying to minimize the admin on this, as far as the audit subcommittee having to go through more questions. I mean, it's 7:58, so giving the audit subcommittee another task with a Moss Adams report, I'm not sure, would add a whole lot of value versus, simply including each individual's comments, if an individual has comments on a Moss Adams report. Again, it's just to provide the council with, the audit subcommittee's perspective, and the individual members on that audit subcommittee.
Okay, so these would be comments that would be made at the meeting. We would discuss an item, and after asking questions, we would then make comments at the meeting. Somebody would note those comments, we would accept the report, and then the report plus the comments would be, I'm just trying to understand.
Well, I think at the end of the day, my idea would be that the discussion in the audit subcommittee would help clarify some of the, if there were questions. But to the extent that there are comments on the audit, on the report itself, it seems to me those comments would be separate from the discussion in the meeting. On the other hand, if in fact the questions, if in fact the questions are answered in the meeting, they could be deleted from that, but again, that requires an edit function, and we start getting complicated in the admin of the meeting.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna chime in, is it seems like if we have comments and they get resolved at the meeting, then it's a moot point. And so wouldn't it make more sense that if there's unresolved questions or comments, that those are the ones that are added to our report to forward on to council, so to let them know these are our concerns.
If the committee thinks that would not be too much of a burden, I think that would be a good suggestion. And that would require somebody in the audit subcommittee to basically write down the comments, and then basically, and then say, these are the formal comments that go along with it.
Well, maybe, I do think we have to worry about the administrative burden on staff.
Yes.
It would seem to me that maybe you reverse your order of things, which is you prepare comments, you bring them to the meeting, and then after the meeting, you could say, after the meeting and after hearing the report and having my questions answered, these are my comments. In other words, because it's not like tomorrow morning it's coming to council. So individual audit subcommittee members, if they wanted to have a series of separate comments or questions or whatever, could simply attach that after the meeting. I think that makes the most sense, because, I mean, I can read the staff report, but obviously we had a fairly in-depth conversation about the report tonight. So I may have had questions, but they got resolved. So I think trying to say before the meeting, I'm gonna have this list of comments, makes less sense than saying after the meeting, when we've had the interaction, if any audit subcommittee member wants to submit separate comments to the council, they can be allowed to do so. That's just a paper function, as you can tell how old I am, because I think of it as paper. But it's just afterwards, submit your
Yes.
comments, and then they can be attached. Does that make more sense?
Yes.
That solves the problem?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
So I think procedurally, just center the committee on the notes or the minutes for the committee, which does, thanks to the clerk, I'm just looking at the most recent minutes, it does well summarize the types of questions that are asked of staff. And then also just to understand how this would fit into the meeting is recorded, and that recording, I believe, is kept and posted on the website. So that's also an area for the council to hear any of the comments that are shared. So I just thinking about how this discussion will add or another dimension to that documentation that exists.
I didn't quite follow all of that. So we have the minutes.
So you have minutes that you adopt, and if you look at the minutes that you recently adopted, the clerk does a really good job of well documenting the questions that are asked of staff in the meeting. So you have that one piece of record, and I'm just also offering another piece of record you have is the actual discussion that's being recorded this evening, and that is posted onto the city website. So that also exists as documentation. So I'm just asking to think about how this recommendation will add depth and another dimension to the record that's already kept about the discussion in the meeting.
To that point, the minutes by design are a summary of the discussion and not addressing specific points. I think that we had, in the last audit subcommittee meeting, or one before that, almost 2 years worth of minutes that we finally got approved. So what I'm trying to do is kind of not put burden on the city clerk's function, on the minutes function, but basically if audit subcommittee members have strong opinions or have feel it is important enough to note to the council, I think that this way it's up to them to submit the questions, and maybe it gets submitted to the clerk, and all they do is they append it, that they just copy paste them onto a report, and it just gets appended to the Moss Adams report or internal audit report, and that's it. But at least there's a record of the concerns in the words of the audit subcommittee members. And again, what I don't want to do is increase the workload of the clerk at all. This is purely just take these comments, these are emails, you just put them on, you just put it as an addendum to the report and you're done. And should the council members want to look at what the audit subcommittee members thought enough of an issue to actually submit a comment, they have that specific audit subcommittee member's comment. Any other questions? So I would like to raise a motion based on Councilmember Gleam's, Councilmember Davis's excellent suggestion.
I'm sorry, just
Yes.
one question. If I, as a member of the public, want to make a written comment on something on the council agenda that has nothing to do with Moss Adams or the audit committee.
Right.
I can do that. And where does that written comment go?
That's in the agenda when you look at city council meetings. You can see all those written comments, both general and to specific agenda items.
And so then how is your suggestion different than that?
Because a Moss Adams report, an internal audit report, does not always end up on the council's agenda.
Okay.
Right? So it may end up on the council's agenda, but at the end of the day, I think the individuals that are part of the audit subcommittee have a different function and a different expertise than the general public is commenting on, which is why we're on the audit subcommittee.
So our comment would appear in the agenda package even if the item itself.
It would appear as an attachment to the internal audit report. It wouldn't be a separate agenda item. It would simply be, whenever that report shows up, there'd be comments attached to that report from the audit subcommittee members, if any.
Right. And remember, this is a request of the council to have a discussion, so the council, if they choose to have this discussion, could change the direction in whatever way they see fit.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. So with that, I'd like to make a motion that the audit subcommittee members have at their discretion the ability to submit comments after internal audit reports are received from the internal auditors to, and I'll say the city clerk, to be appended in the final package that goes to council.
And you're asking the council to approve that change?
This is not in the existing scope of the audit subcommittee.
So that would be
This-
at you would be, a part of your motion, I would presume, would be asking the
Yes,
city
that's
council
correct, yes, that's correct.
to
That's correct.
allow the audit subcommittee to submit
Yes, that's
comments as part of an internal audit.
Correct, that's correct. I will clarify my motion, which is to ask the city council to amend the audit subcommittee's scope to include comments from audit subcommittee members on internal audit reports. If the audit subcommittee members feel a need to actually comment. There may be no.
Shorten that slightly.
There may
You're
be.
still making the motion, but you're.
That was just, that was a narrative thing that doesn't go to motion. The motion ends with, asking the city council to expand the audit subcommittee's, remit or role to append comments to internal audit reports, after receipt from Moss Adams. But before the reports go to the city council.
So really, Chair, what you're asking for is I just want to get the city attorney away, and there's this item C that you're discussing, and there's two parts to it. So it sounds like you're trying to break up the two parts.
It's a C1.
Right, so you're trying to break up this action and take an action just on the first.
Just on C1, that's
Right.
correct.
And so I think the wording in there is exactly what you're asking this body to opine on.
Yes, approve a request to the city council. Is
Right,
what-
that's how it's worded.
Yes, okay. So that's, that would be the first motion on this item C. Should we take a vote on that motion? Before we talk about the second motion, because the second motion is completely unrelated to the first.
I think that would be fine.
Okay, so,
Have you had a second to your motion?
first of all, do we have the motion clear?
I mean, it's essentially what's on the agenda.
Okay, so, so do we have a second then for the motion?
I'll second your motion.
Thank you. Voice vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, the second item, C2. One of the things I've noticed in the staff reports, which has given me quite a bit of pause, is in the staff reports, there's a section at the very end of the staff reports that note that it's called Financial Impacts and Budget Actions. And from what I can see, the way this is defined is financial impacts and budget actions to the city's budget, is what I can tell, from which appears to be relatively narrowly defined. So the implications of that, so I was looking back to the study session in 2019 when the 6-cycle RENA numbers were discussed. And in that agenda item, the SCAG RENA numbers were actually appended to that staff report. So 4,829 or 4,929, which was the October allocation, and then 9,058, which was the November allocation within a month. And so in that meeting, Mayor McEwen and the council were discussing, well, it's 9,000, but it could be up to 30,000. And the mayor said, if we do the math, it could be 36,000. So the only analysis that was in this report or in this study session was one by HRNA about the different project types that would be most profitable for developers. But there was no discussion and no analysis of the impact to the city of basically having up to 36,000 housing units added to an existing stock of 52,000. And so the council kind of had a very general discussion, but it had absolutely no data to start thinking about what the implications of a decision like that were. Lately, back in 2021, parking structure 3 was declared surplus. again, when you look at the financial section, there's no discussion about the impact to businesses, the impact to sales tax revenues, there's not even a discussion about the direct parking revenues from parking structure 3. And again, just recently in October, the parking lot in back of Main Street was declared surplus. And again, there's absolutely no data about, if all those businesses disappear off of Main Street because all of a sudden they can't be supported by those parking lots, what happens to the sales tax revenues? What happens to? So there are 2 issues happening here. One is that there is no data, no financial data being provided to the council when they're contemplating these decisions, number 1. And number 2, it's not forcing, there's no forcing function here to say that, for example, you're dismantling commercial infrastructure, so you're taking out parking structure 3, you're taking out the Main Street parking lots. And yet there's a general discussion about revitalizing, we need to revitalize the city's commercial. Because as we discussed earlier this evening, the general fund's revenues have very anemic growth, and the amounts of demands upon the general fund are growing, seems to be exponentially. So at the end of the day, there seems to be a complete kind of hole in any analysis by the city of these kinds of decisions as to what the knock-on effects are going to be to some of the revenue-generating assets in the city. And when you look at the general fund, over 50% of the general fund is generated by business activity, commercial activity. So as commercial infrastructure gets peeled away, all of a sudden the ability of the city to, for example, come up with an integrated revitalization plan and really plug it in and see what it can do starts becoming permanently constrained by the shaving off of commercial infrastructure. But nowhere is the financial impact of the city of those kinds of decisions captured in any of these staff reports. And so one of the questions, what this item relates to is having the audit subcommittee being able to provide suggestions to council as to what should be included in these staff reports so that council gets a full picture of the implications of going down a road on a certain decision. Because as it stands now, these are presented almost as cost-free decisions, which is wild. So that is another expansion of the audit subcommittee's remit, which would be to be able to recommend to council just on the financials only, because this is the audit subcommittee, information items that should be included in staff reports.
I have to ask, did you actually watch the meeting where we discussed surplusing parking structure 3? Did you watch the meeting? Because the staff report specifically, I don't know about the written staff report, I haven't looked at that. But I know at that meeting, we got a report from staff that quoted the parking study that we had done in downtown that showed there would be absolutely no loss of parking revenue, nor effect on the businesses because those places in parking structure 3, which we had been contemplating taking down for, I want to say almost a decade, those places were replaced. Those lost parking spots were replaced in parking structure 6. Parking structure 6 was made bigger to accommodate the loss of parking structure 3. So we did discuss what would be the effect on downtown parking, what would be the effect on businesses, and ultimately, the result was no, because we weren't losing any net parking spaces because we had already replaced the parking structure 3 parking spaces in parking structure 6.
Therein lies exactly the problem.
But that was in the staff.
No,
Reported to us.
my point is, you're assuming it's a zero-sum game with parking spaces. If in fact, you've got a general fund that's anemic, and you've got to revitalize business, you're gonna probably need more parking, not less.
We don't. We've done parking
no,
studies that
which-
show that we are
yes.
so overparked in downtown, it's not
Can
funny.
we make sure, excuse me, can we make sure that
I mean, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Chair Burville, if you could wait for
No, I apologize.
Councilmember Davis to finish.
But the thing is, we do parking, I can't remember when the last one we did is, but our occupancy in the parking structures in downtown is to the point where we're talking about how can we better use, for example, the top part of the parking structures, not for parking, but for other economic enterprises that will generate revenue, because we're not generating revenue because so little, I mean, I think somehow 60% sticks in my mind as being sort of an average for use for all the downtown parking structures. Because we have the Expo line, we have better bus service, people are using alternate means of transportation. So I'm just saying that I understand what you're saying, and I think it's always important for staff to tell us what the economic impacts of our decision will be. But just with regard to parking structure 3, I remember having a very robust discussion about that and about, you know, what our parking utilization rate was, what would be the effect on parking revenues, what would be the effect on local businesses. We had that discussion.
I won't dispute that discussion was had. My point, however, is that in an environment where you need to be growing the commercial activity in the city, at the end of the day, there is no holistic, I mean, it's a much larger issue, but at the end of the day, there's not even a caveat in there that says, if in fact we were able to, I mean, look, Mesa Rich has given, you know, Santa Monica Place back to the lenders, right? You know, REI is gone. So yes, you do parking structures, you know, in environments like we have today, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, we're overparked. But if in fact there was a plan to revitalize everything, then all of a sudden we could be underparked. And there is absolutely nothing in the staff reports that indicates that, well, you know what, if business ticked up by this amount of money or this amount of activity, all of a sudden we would need this amount of parking. So everything is assumed to be as is, and as is in a relatively depressed situation. And again, you know, to the extent that general fund revenues have got to increase, and over half of them are generated from commercial activity, you know, at the end of the day, at least something like that should be included in a discussion by staff to say, be aware that this is one of the things that needs to be considered if this decision is made. So, you know, and it's not just parking structure 3, it's the Main Street lots, it's what happened in 2019 with the Six Cycle Arena. Amazing. 36,000 units, and everyone said, okay. And there was, you know, and we're talking about, infrastructure, everything else that's related. You look at the unfunded capital list, you know, I looked at the unfunded capital list. I didn't see anything that's really related to this kind of build out. So there is, from my reading of the staff reports, a gaping hole in the information being presented to council as to what the ramifications are of the decisions that they are going down. The decisions themselves appear to be siloed. They're not in a holistic manner taking into consideration the strategic challenge in front of the city and how these specific decisions fit into that strategic challenge.
Well,
Mark?
the city, oh, I'm sorry, not the city.
So
I think what you're asking is that staff reports, theoretically, if the audit subcommittee had any say to this. But what you're suggesting more is that staff reports become no more nuanced in presenting not just their view of what we should do, but include other views so that the city council can make a choice of A, B, C, D versus just presenting option C as saying that's the best option. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm trying to take opinion out of this, and what I'm trying to get at is that the city is facing very strategic challenges, right? Financial challenges. And from any objective perspective, at least listing out
Well, that's what I'm saying.
what a specific these decisions are siloed, and they are taken within the context of a much larger economy that the city is operating in. And the question, and what happens is these in many cases are irreversible decisions, right? So the question is, if in fact there's gonna be, knock-on economic impacts, it's not just, for example, let's take the Main Street parking lots. There's the revenues that comes out of the parking lots. Then there's the sales taxes from those businesses. Then there's the permits that those businesses have to pay for every year. And then there's a myriad of other things, right?
So what you're asking, what you're suggesting, I said A, B, C, and D, what you're suggesting is that staff reports contain a holistic view of possible consequences and benefits of every decision, correct?
Correct. At least putting them in black and white so that they can be looked at, considered, and then if they're dismissed, they're dismissed. But at least they're there to spur the conversation.
So a more holistic view
Correct.
of saying, if we here, even though this is passé because we've already made this decision, but the decision on PS3, which was started 3 councils before our council, at least 2 councils before, 2 4-year cycles before when it was first discussed. You're saying you disagree with the assumptions that the loss of PS3 would not affect,
Correct.
or would affect retail business, whereas the city under Rick Cole, or before, Lee? Before.
We've been talking about PS3 since it was declared seismically deficient, which was, you may remember, Ms. Klein, but I think at least 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah, no, it was an issue.
It may have been
when I
under
got
Rod.
there, so it was.
Yeah, Rod or
definitely
Rick,
during
probably Rod.
But yeah, actions were taken under both Rod and Rick.
Yeah, so I guess my point is, I hear what you're saying, and not getting into philosophy, getting into philosophy, I would agree with you. However, the council made their decisions at that time, which predated COVID, which predated the economic downturn in the city. Now, I have the suspicion that you would argue that those decisions helped precipitate the downturn in our economy. And I've made other discussions happen, which I didn't bother this year because I won't be on the council, but traditionally every year I complain about the cost of parking at Christmas. Now, post-Christmas, the staff did a quote-unquote report for the 3 days of parking and said, well, it didn't really help. It didn't make any difference. I would tend to disagree because I look at other cities that shutter their parking meters, shutter their parking charges at Christmas, which does spur business and make it easier to shop in a city where retail shopping is at a premium right now, where we need that help. Although we are coming back. And I want to emphasize I'll be at a store opening tomorrow at 1 o'clock, a store opening the following day at 10:30 a.m., both downtown. So there are stores opening, and some retail shift is always happening. Stores always open, stores close. In 1981, for instance, on Main Street, Laura Ashley was opening, Mohole was open, other stores were open there. None of those stores are there now because retail tends to be a transitory business. One of the reasons I was celebrating long-term businesses the second half of this year in City Council, it's so rare to have a business that is long-term in the city. I agree with a more neutral approach to staff reports. I'm not sure it's in the purview or even the suggestion of the audit subcommittee to ask that. And that would be my objection. We probably are beyond our purview. But yes, I would like to see a holistic, I would like to see a holistic approach in staff reports. And that's one of the things that I looked at years ago, is that staff reports felt like they were already preordained to make sure that the council would agree with that.
You don't want to get into a situation where some future council, determines that, there's a complete strategic kind of revamp of the city's you've got world-class assets in the pier and the Santa Monica Place for shopping and the promenade for outdoor dining, and then you've got a potential for.
We don't have that ability as the audit subcommittee
No,
or a city
I'm
council.
just throwing out a theoretical.
For instance,
Here's a theoretical.
For instance, Councilmember Davis earlier said, well, geez, maybe we should take the dog park off the CIP list. Well, for me on the city council, I thought that was an extremely viable solution, and even seeing how the Little Blue Dog Run is operating so far. I think it's still a great solution. Another council could disagree. A third council could come along in 2028 and say, damn it, we want that dog run. So that's always going to change because you don't have the same players on the city council and the same business conditions, economic conditions of the city. I don't know if you could make decisions just based upon the economy of the moment because you're actually looking
That's what's
at
happening.
the long-term economy.
That's what's happening. It's the economy of the moment. When we talk about parking studies, we talk about, well, what's happening today? Look, it's not being utilized.
So we're kind of way off base.
I have to correct you on that. Back in 2010, 2011, we did a Walker. We had the Walker parking study, which was a huge comprehensive parking study, not just of all the public lots, but all the private lots in the entire downtown area. And that was in 2011 when the promenade was thriving, and the conclusion was we were greatly overparked. So that's not a condition of post-COVID or post-economic downturn. There have been numerous studies that have shown that we're way overparked in downtown, which is why when it was determined that parking structures, both 1 and 3, were seismically deficient, that the question was, should we spend money fixing them? And they think the answer so far has been no, because we don't need that parking. And with parking structure 3, how long ago did we approve parking structure 6? It's been in operation for 5 years, and it was 5 years before that, so it was 10 years ago that we said, let's make up the difference in parking structure 6. So I don't think this is a recent phenomenon that it's been determined we're grossly underparked. But it also, hopefully, in all honesty, we should be increasing our overparking because we don't want people driving to our downtown. We want them taking alternative forms of transportation that are not going to cause our children to fry in the next 50 years. That is also the issue, is do we want to encourage the most environmentally destructive form of people traveling around, which is driving, or do we want to create alternatives, which is what we've done through Big Blue Bus, the Expo line, micro-mobility, all of those things. But I don't have a problem with going to council and saying we want more financial information. I just think, in all honesty, and maybe it's just the examples that you landed on, for example, the study session on the RENA numbers was designed to tell us that wasn't about what we were going to be, there wasn't any discretion there. That was to inform us how they got to those RENA allocations. There wasn't anything we could have done at that point that said, oh no, that's too expensive, we don't like those RENA allocations, please go back to SCAG and tell them to reduce them. There wasn't anything to be done. And in fact, we have made financial adjustments since the RENA numbers were adopted. For example, we adopted an ordinance that has to do with infrastructure build out for certain housing type of projects. I don't remember what all the details were, but we did an ordinance for requiring people who are adding to the infrastructure burden because they're building housing to contribute to that. So, contribute to the cost of that. So we do address those financials. It may not have been in that study session, but it was something that staff took seriously, thought about, and came back with a solution, which was a proposed ordinance.
Well, on the RENA question, I'll simply say that I've done a full audit of the RENA numbers, and that's a different issue for a different day. Again, I just get back to, in the staff reports, in the financial section, there should be a discussion of the implications of making this decision. When you take off, while I understand we're trying to encourage, for example, all alternate forms of mobility, 75% of the non-international visitors, arrive in Santa Monica by car. At the end of the day, is that going to change materially with the light rail, whatever? Data would have to be pulled together to say how successful are these alternate means vis-a-vis where are we? In other words, a serious approach to figuring out the city's business plan would have to be done before these kinds of irreversible decisions are made. And in these staff reports, basically just bullet pointing, these are some of the considerations here. Because again, once these things are gone, they're gone. There's, given how the cost of land, there's no way that new things are gonna be, new parking or whatever is gonna be done, which makes these things extraordinarily, weighty decisions. Simply increasing a holistic view of the issues at stake, I think would be valuable for the council to see in their staff reports in that financial section.
So just to riff off that before, since I'm not gonna be here in a couple of months, the question I would have had more when we're talking about, yes, increasing the ability and desire of people to find other ways to get to downtown shopping, would also be to make sure that that area is robust enough that people aren't driving to Century City instead of staying in Santa Monica. So if our costs of parking, lack of perceived safety, and a lack of easy access to downtown that people perceive as safe, easy to get to, easy to leave from, hampers their shopping, then they'll go see those stores in a different shopping center and in fact drive 20 minutes instead of 10 minutes to do their shopping or dining because they perceive it may be safer, better, whatever it is. Parking's cheaper if they go to the marina, all those different things.
They'd rather see skyscrapers instead of the beach and the sunset.
I don't think they'd rather see that. But I would say that there are obviously other factors, economic factors and esoteric factors to consider in decisions that the city council makes.
Look, at the end of the day, I'm just concerned about the city's financial profile and the trajectory. And I just want to see that as these decisions are made, at least some acknowledgement is made that there are issues beyond a siloed point in time, kind of decision, vis-a-vis a longer term. I mean, if Santa Monica ever becomes a destination again,
We are a destination. We just got voted the top beach city in the United States.
Our hotels are 85% full.
Well, some are.
somewhere.
But overall,
But anyways.
look at overall, I would take issue even with the negative issues that we see on our streets and we hear. I just came back from 2 cities in the deep south, in the Florida Panhandle, I think it's called, last night. And so I got to see other beaches, other areas. I think because we're at the foot of Los Angeles, we have Los Angeles's issues, but we also get the benefits from being 20 minutes from the airport, the benefits from being a worldwide destination. Now, we have to live up to that, but we do have those benefits. So I would not say if tourists come back. Tourists are here. They're just not in Southern California as much as they were before the pandemic because of foreign travel. So our tourism tends to be more local, county Southern California rather than international. But with the remodeling of our hotels, and you also saw it today in Long Beach, when a classic old building just got remodeled, reopened as a new hotel, Fairmont in Long Beach. that our beach areas, all through Southern California, overall, are still the envy of the world. You and I may live in the middle of it and see the minute issues in the city. But people who are coming here don't always see that. They see the fact that they're in this place with this fabulous pier, beautiful sunsets, right? Stores, restaurants that are Michelin starred, as the report said in Travel and Leisure. All those things are here and they still attract people and always will. The question is, are we always the best custodians of that we can be?
I always look at the compound annual growth rate of the general fund revenues. That's what I'm looking at. Half of those are business related. That's what I'm looking at.
That's not necessarily retail, you're saying business.
Yeah, but it's all business. It's permits. It's
Right,
sales
but
tax. It's
But I
transit.
just say you're focusing on just,
They all have to
Four
be
or five
firing on all,
blocks
they
downtown.
all have to be firing on all
or
cylinders.
you're also looking at innovation and other things, and we're way off topic.
I
I
know.
was gonna say, maybe there's a way to short circuit this because,
Make a motion.
yeah, I was gonna say,
So-
Chair Verville, I understand what you're trying to get at. And I don't think it's a bad idea. We always want staff to tell us what the economic impacts of our decisions are. I mean, I think that's a piece of data. And so, but this is something that, in all honesty, really isn't something we as the audit subcommittee can decide. I think that's something that the city council needs to decide. So maybe the way to frame it, if you don't mind my taking a stab at it, is to make a motion that the audit I used the wrong, is that the audit subcommittee makes a recommendation to the city council that they consider what, if any, additional economic data they would like to see in staff reports. And I think it's up to the city council to determine what it is they would like to see. And if they say, no, we're fine, then that's their purview. And if they say, oh, there might be some economic, we have 2 incoming council members, one of whom's a CPA and one of whom's a financial analyst. So they might have some decent ideas about, I think we do need to recognize that sometimes when decisions are being foisted on us, like the RETA numbers, it's impossible to know what the impact will be. And at that point, staff can say it's difficult to know, or secondary or tertiary impacts. We had a lot of discussion about secondary and tertiary impacts in connection with the Olympics. But I think maybe how about just this, a simple motion, that the audit subcommittee recommend that council consider what, if any, additional economic impact information they would like to see in staff reports.
I would second that.
And I'll vote for it.
All right.
Who are we attributing that second to?
I think the chair, Verville.
Enthusiastically seconded that. Voice vote, all in favor of that motion? Aye. All opposed? None, it carries unanimously. And with that, it is 8:41, and I think I'll call the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Our last meeting together, really. It's gonna be a whole